Let's talk about blade finishes. This is known as a satin finish. A satin finish is basically a series of extremely fine scratches all in the same line that combine together to create a uniform luster. You will occasionally see a scratch that's a little bit deeper, but that's a satin finish. An advantage of a satin finish is that it doesn't take as much effort as a glossier finish. Another advantage of a satin finish is that it won't show scratches and imperfections as readily as a perfectly mirrored finish. Another advantage of a satin finish is that if you do scratch it up, you may be able to clean it up yourself with a series of very fine grit sandpapers or very fine grit Scotch-Brite or whatever. This is your low-cost Chinese butterfly sword with the loose handle, and they did a little bit of polishing on the blade. You can see all kinds of fine scratches. They didn't spend a lot of time on it. I suppose we would call this a satin finish, although I'm reluctant to do that. You would expect to see a perfect mirror finish on a pair of $4,000 custom butterfly swords. You'd be able to see your reflection. When you looked into it, you wouldn't see any fine scratches. It takes about 13 steps to get a custom mirror finish according to Western custom knife maker quality standards. It starts out with rougher grits and finishes up with some very fine grits. So you do one grit level, polish it up perfectly, and then move on to the next finer grit. If at a later stage you see a scratch that was caused by an earlier grit, you have to go back to that earlier stage and finish up. It's not that people can't do this with a certain degree of skill, it's simply that very few people are willing to do this. The advantages of a mirror finish over a satin finish is that it's more resistant to corrosion. It is very difficult to find an overseas forge with the ability and the willingness to put a perfect mirror finish on a pair of full custom butterfly swords. It is extremely difficult to find an overseas forge that will put a mirror finish on, say, a production knife or a pair of production butterfly swords. Most of the overseas mirror finishes are done by machine, and in the words of Mark Wade, a fine U.S. custom knife maker, he considers most overseas mirror finishes to be like a U.S. satin finish. Iron Man Steel does their glossy finishes by hand, takes about 12 or 13 steps. They can do a pretty darn fine mirror finish, but on a production sword that costs $400 or $500, it's just not happening. However, the glossy finish they put out is so good that you can see your reflection in it. It's much better than any overseas custom finish I've ever seen. It's not done by machine, and it's a really nice product. It's something that I satin finish on a D2 blade. Certain types of steel do not take a nice mirror finish polish. 440C polishes up real nice, but if you would actually take this D2 steel blade to mirror finish, it would start getting an orange peel-like look, so instead we take it to satin finish. And incidentally, satin finish D2 is pretty non-reflective, so it makes a nice military knife without having to do bead blast. So the reason that we call our really glossy, really mirror-like finish done by Iron Man Steel on EWC's butterfly swords a glossy finish rather than a mirror finish is because we want to distinguish between a really shiny see-yourself product that does have or may have some of those fine scratches and a multi-thousand-dollar product that won't. I've said before that the best coating to inhibit corrosion on a carbon steel blade is no coating. It's to find the right steel that does not need the coating. And if you can get away with D2, it's got a lot of corrosion-resistant properties. Swords is decorative chrome. It's a shiny layer that gets plated, very thin plating, on top of a carbon steel. And they're doing this because, all in all, it's pretty inexpensive. If you look at this closely, already there's rust down here. The problem with a chrome plating is that it comes off. Over time, it'll start to flake off, and this is particularly true if you ever leave it in your trunk during the winter. It's a really bad idea. When it flakes off, it hits the floor, and someone's going to have to clean that up. Anyways, you're going to have to increase the maintenance in the areas where it's flaked off. There's another type of chrome called industrial chrome, and that's an entirely different story, but it's not particularly decorative. Moving up, you come to your basic powder coats. To put a powder coat on a blade, first you specially treat the blade, then you put this special powder on it. It comes in a number of colors. Then it gets baked. This is a powder coat over AISI 9260 spring steel on an everything Wing Chun tough as hell training sword. If you want to have a thin powder coat, you can do that. If you want to have a thick powder coat, it'll start to show texture. I'm sorry, this is a Scrapyard Knives combat knife. It has a sort of crinkly coating on it. Not sure exactly what that is. I think it might be some kind of a painted on coating. And what they like to say is that if you have a textured coating, the high spots are going to have to wear off before there's any wear on the lower spots. So that's the reason why I don't particularly mind if a powder coating is showing some texture. I particularly like the fact that it means that we're not stingy with the coating material. Now when you do a coating and you do a sharp, you're going to have to sharpen the edge. When you sharpen the edge, that means there's an untreated area that's going to require higher maintenance, and it's also going to potentially be an area where things can creep between the coating and the blade. All coatings wear off. Coatings can be removed quicker with impacts. That's why you would prefer to find a steel that doesn't need a coating. As you move up the food chain, you get a variety of other possible surface treatments. A really nice looking coating is a titanium nitride coating. It goes on extremely thin, and it's got a sort of Teflon-like feel to it, so it helps things slice in nicely. That's the good news. The bad news is it costs more, and it also is rather on the porous side. So it's not really my favorite choice for corrosion resistance. Moving further up the food chain, you get to some of the coatings that are used on guns, a gun coat. So this is a Chris Reeve combat knife. They call it the Yarborough, and the Green Beret graduating classes get these knives. They call those the Green Beret knife. And it's got a gun coat on it. This is not a cheap steel being buffed up with a gun coat. This is one of those super steels. Of all of the coatings is a product called Cerakote. And Cerakote is more expensive. It's too expensive to use on a production butterfly sword.